Good evening and welcome to the Weekend Primetime. Joining us at the table tonight are Catherine Christian, MS Now legal analyst and former assistant district attorney for the Manhattan DA's office, and Dean Obeidallah, host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM. We're going to begin this hour with Attorney General Pam Bondi sending a clear message to Congress. You're not getting anything more on Jeffrey Epstein. The DOJ has sent a letter to Congress with a list of all, quote, politically exposed persons in the millions of files released related to its probes into the disgraced late sex trafficker, including President Trump. We should note Trump has not been tied to any criminal wrongdoing related to Epstein's crimes. In the letter, Bondi writes, quote, in accordance with the requirements of the Epstein Transparency Act, the department released all records, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the department that relate to any of the 9 different categories. But lawmakers aren't impressed. Here's what Republican Congressman Thomas Massie and Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia, the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee, had to say earlier.
They're citing deliberative process privilege in order not to release some of the documents. We want to be able to look at all these files. They can't keep those documents down after they've already produced them.
This is a massive cover-up being led by the White House and the DOJ. The actual files that have been out in the public or that we've seen, they're overly redacted. Many of the survivors and victims, their names are actually appearing with there's no protection for the survivors.
So, Catherine, I want to start with you, and actually something that Congressman Ro Khanna, who, of course, has been out front on so much of this, has recently said in reaction to Bondi's letter. He says the DOJ is, quote, purposely muddying the waters on who was a predator and who was mentioned in an email. Can you help break down for us what he means there?
Well, the response is basically a bleep you to Congress. But I have to say that the act was poorly written because it failed to explicitly state you cannot withhold because of privilege, deliberative process privilege. It doesn't say you can, but it doesn't say you can't. There's no definition section. What the heck is a politically exposed person? There's no penalty section. In other words, failure to comply with this act, you'll get X, Y, and Z. And the list, I mean, you have Elvis and Lisa Marie Presley. What this basically is the equivalent of a document dump. You want names? I'll give you names. Kurt Cobain, Janet Reno, Janis Joplin. So a list of dead people because they were named because as what is the definition of politically exposed person? So you have to go through those names, and it's clear that this is the DOJ's reaction to this is what we're giving you, and the act says we don't have to do anything else.
So does that mean that Congress has no recourse here? Like they have to pass another law in order to get more information?
They can actually file a lawsuit. Now, they tried. They went before the judge where Ghislaine Maxwell's habeas corpus case is pending and where her grand jury matters are pending. They should have, and they can now, I'm not giving them legal advice, file a separate suit. Don't go for a judge where a case is pending. Do it in the D.C. Circuit. Do it in the Southern District of New York where most of these files came from.
So, Dean, if, like Catherine says, this bill is poorly written and DOJ is going to be able to weasel their way behind the law and their manipulation of it and say, okay, this is it, and say they win. Are they losing, though, the big picture, the political optics, when you have someone like Nancy Mace? Let's put up her tweet. She tweeted, despite the memo released by DOJ last night, not all the Epstein files have been released, and the excuses provided for not releasing all the files will not hold up in a court of law.
I've seen polling that shows the approval rating of Trump handling Epstein's around 25%. I mean, that's the lowest on any issue. It's even lower than immigration. This is not helpful to them, but, I spoke to Lisa Phillips, one of the survivors, and on my show a few times. And recently, what they want is justice. Well, releasing the files will help them heal, they say. Some of them can't even remember who abused them. Others do. It is beyond me. You have over 1,000 victims. DOJ's got the statements of victims. You have them in the hearing. They want to go forward. They want to prosecute people, and DOJ won't prosecute anybody. And to me, that's the biggest joke. You tell me you're not going to prosecute one man? There's no way, as a lawyer, when I look at this, I cannot believe you don't have the evidence to do it. And they do. And they won't do it because they're protecting the men, just like Donald Trump didn't want anything out last, remember? Nothing. You get nothing. Move on. Then 2 weeks ago, he says, move on. And sure enough, they're moving on. What about the women? I want the prosecutions of the men who abused them when they were children and when they were adults.
Catherine, I'm curious, if you were advising the survivors, the victims here, what would you be able to tell them about what their options look like? What they can actually do to hold DOJ accountable? I mean, every time we have them on our show, on our air, they repeatedly tell us, and I think everyone saw it in the hearing the other day, they have no communication with Pam Bondi. Some of them have told us that they've asked her for meetings, can't get them. So at what point do they take a different kind of action?
They can't remain silent. So you said you had them on air. They have to keep going out there, keep speaking. Push the Congress to take that next step. Maybe it is a lawsuit to get, a judge to say there has to be a special master, and this special master will look at the files and see what should be released. Now, they should not be given false hope that there will be prosecutions, but there has to at least be an attempt on behalf of DOJ to look at the evidence. Allegations are not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but they have to at least try.
Do you think it really would be false hope? I mean, is it just at this point so impossible to?
It's not impossible, but we're talking about decades ago. Memories fade, and I doubt these men introduced themselves to these young women. So it's very hard for identification. The Southern District of New York chose to just prosecute Epstein and Maxwell. Why? Probably because it was hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt against some of these men.
But my question is, with so many other individuals who helped the Epstein network thrive and who greased the wheels by making travel arrangements, by booking hotels, by getting visas, by the banks that handled the flow of cash, and there were compliance officers raising red flags there too. Why couldn't the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, find one co-conspirator to try?
Look, in France, their prosecutors just announced they opened a criminal investigation. They appointed magistrates to investigate. They already have 3 investigations they've begun. Why can they do it in France and not the United States of America?
Not just France. In Poland, in Norway, in the UK.
Big consequences.
It might take down Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, who had nothing to do with Epstein.
So this is the biggest child women trafficking scheme in our lives, and this is the biggest cover-up in our lives done by our government, because the other governments are holding people accountable. And Pam Bondi, and I wish people talk about it more, she was AG of Florida from 2011, 2019. In Florida, in the state Jeffrey Epstein was continuing to abuse women. She made a big deal of prosecuting other child predators. She never
it was a huge part of her identity.
Right, and she never investigated Jeffrey Epstein. And the question is why? Who was she protecting? And I think we know it's powerful men, and Democrat and Republican. That's my sense, that she should have to answer for why didn't she investigate anyone? These new files show us emails after 2011 while she's AG of guys talking about women. Is she a pro? Is she not? It was going on in her state, and she did nothing to protect the women and children of her state.
I think it's also been interesting to see how the forces that usually flank Trump and protect him and circle the wagons, how they are responding to all of this, because many of them had once upon a time demanded release of the Epstein files. I want to play some sound from some right-wing personalities and how they are now treating all of this as a joke.
It looks like he's mostly just a fixer, a guy who advises. He helps people with their problems. Sometimes those problems are, you need a girl.
Or some penicillin.
Or some, if you need it, he's got it.
He's a sex rabbi.
He should perform at the halftime show next year.
Yeah, Dean, what do you make of that? That lightness with which they are talking about little girls who have been sexually assaulted and raped.
First of all, Greg Gutfeld's not funny in any way, and he's there and he's mocked me on his show, so I just want to be very clear. So it's just a response. He is awful in every way, nothing redeeming about him. The joking about, look, I'm a comedian at times, allegedly, and there are places you can joke. That's different. These guys are defending, on the right, they're defending Trump. They're defending the idea of not giving documents. And you're like, no one should be surprised. They support Trump, the man adjudicated of sexually harassing and assaulting E. Jean Carroll, and adjudicated of being a rapist, a guy who attempted a coup, who was convicted of 34 felonies for cheating in the 2016 election, who incited a terrorist attack on our Capitol and part of the terrorists. This is all part and parcel of the GOP. This is who they are.
But they don't need to defend Jeffrey Epstein.
I guess he's a good friend of Donald Trump. He's his buddy.
I understand why they have an interest in safeguarding their friend Donald Trump, who's in the White House, but Jeffrey Epstein.
That's ridiculous. He's a sex offender, and Maxwell is the convicted sex offender of minors.
But I think it is. It represents the push to move forward beyond this story. Oh, this is old news. This is something that we can move beyond.
they've tried it before, though. This actually isn't the first
but
time that we've seen them attempt to
I don't think the cycle is moving on. But I guess my question now is, can these co-conspirators, just from my own reading of the case and of the files, I could think of a couple of people that I, a non-lawyer, would think would be in big-time trouble still. Do you think that they can rest easy now that Pam Bondi has basically said, case closed?
They shouldn't, because the next shoe will drop, and I'm assuming Congress will then say, okay, now we're going to have to file a lawsuit. There is no statute of limitations on child sex trafficking. There are on other crimes. So if they committed other crimes, they're going to get away with it. But if DOJ, if any legitimate prosecutor can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for child sex trafficking, they can be prosecuted.
You know, the thing that I think about when we talk about the Epstein story is that a few times over the last several months, our show has covered a case of a pastor who abused many women in Oklahoma, going back decades. And the current attorney general there was able to go after and get this guy, even though some of these cases are 40 plus years old, because he scoured basically the available statutes in Oklahoma. His team, investigators, contacted all of these women. They actually went back and did all their homework and re-interviewed people and listened to them and met with them. And they were actually able to get him on an old, like, frontier era statute. And he is behind bars in Oklahoma now. And, you know, will be facing justice. And so when I think about the fact that that is something someone was able to do, actually relatively quite quickly, in the same era that this Epstein story has unfolded, it really just shows me, and I think just shows the public in general, like how little effort it seems is going in here. When again, you remember they haven't even been calling and speaking to and re-interviewing victims and survivors who do say they have memories, who do say they can, some of them name names, and they're not even getting meetings.
Minimal effort. R. Kelly was successfully prosecuted for age-old allegations because you had a U.S. attorney who went after him and decided we're going to do this, even though it's difficult, because you had a lot of the young women, young girls who were recanting and flipping their stories back and forth. But you have to make the effort. Even if at the end of the day there's an acquittal, at least you made the effort.
Look, and this DOJ, they just tried to prosecute 6 Democrats in Congress. You know, they tried to prosecute James Comey, Tish James. If Trump...
Sandwich guy.
Right, the sandwich guy, and they didn't get it. But if Donald Trump, Mr. Retribution, said to Pam Bondi, go prosecute the bad people, I can assure you they're going to grand jury. Maybe they get indicted, maybe they don't, but they go. This DOJ is a law firm for Donald Trump, and he is protecting his friends. Marjorie Taylor Greene said, Donald Trump said, you're going to hurt my friends. And I think there's some truth to that, about the idea of getting these files out. His friends will be hurt.
Well, we'll stay on top of this story. Catherine Christian and Dean Obeidallah, thank you so much for being with us. And next, how Trump and his aides are cashing in and who is paying for it. You're watching The Weekend Primetime on MS Now. Tomorrow is President's Day, and in that spirit, let's take a moment to replay the iconic moment from President John F. Kennedy's 1961 inaugural speech.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Oh, how times have changed. Now things look a little different for those in top posts in the Trump administration. You know, those aides who champion sweeping budget cuts for the world's poorest while they enjoy the privileges and perks of taxpayer-funded positions. Reuters, citing documents, is reporting that a permanent security detail for Trump's budget chief, Russell Vought, is being paid for with the remains of USAID operating expenses, the organization that Vought helped dismantle. Though usually the OMB director doesn't require the same security detail as a national security aide overseeing, say, a campaign to attack ISIS. Now $15 million of your tax dollars are being spent protecting the Project 2025 architect through the end of the year. And we're learning that the minimum cost of $1 million for 1 million donors giving the money to a group raising funds for events and projects in honor of America's 250th anniversary can gain access to Trump himself. The New York Times notes the detailed breakdowns of packages for donors indicate that those who give $1 million or more will get invitations to a private Freedom Room 250 thank you reception hosted by Mr. Trump with a historic photo opportunity. Those who give $2.5 million or more also are being offered speaking roles at an event in Washington on July 4th. Joining us now to break it all down is MS Now political analyst and senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion, Tim O'Brien. He's the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being Donald. So, Tim, the nation's 250th anniversary.
Right.
I mean, I guess we should have expected this,
Yes.
but even for Donald Trump, isn't this a bit much?
I don't think it is. I think it's in course with who he's been for about 60 years. And I think, given what we're confronting now, like how easily they grift, the idea that ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country is a given way to I'm getting mine, I'm going to get it as quickly as I can, which is what everyone in that administration is doing. Where are we? Where is the Republican Party? Where are institutions? Where is the rule of law around all this? So some stops are being put in place. And I think this has happened so frequently with Trump. And the ante gets bigger, but what he's doing doesn't change. He's selling the office. He's selling access to the office. He's essentially turned the White House into a Walmart. And where are the stops?
It seems to be like so constant, so diffuse. It's like lawmakers actually struggle to wrap their minds around every single piece of it and to have a coherent message or to focus on one element of it. I mean, for a while, like the ballroom, I guess, sort of became a symbol of some of this, and it gave people something to latch on to. But it is almost like impressive might not be the right word, but it is like that they've thought to monetize things that I just could never even think of monetizing.
They got to steal everything that's not nailed down. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Because you have a moral core, and that's the difference. They're craven, and the party's afraid of him. They're cowards. This is bribery or grift or influence peddling, whatever kind of terminology you want to use for it. And it's not just that Trump's lining his pockets, that he's also selling out the national interests along the way. And he's degrading the stature of the office he inhabits. Yes. And I don't think that's a partisan or ideological observation. It is just about bad government, and it's about the corruption of the federal government under his auspices.
Yeah, so I want to talk to you more about what other parties are getting in exchange for their donations or whatever, the
investments.
Investments, that's probably the more appropriate term here. For example, I know Forbes reported earlier this week, I believe it was, that the founder of Binance was pardoned last year, CZ, and just coincidentally, Binance now holds 87% of Trump's stablecoin. In that case, at least we kind of maybe know what the quid and the quo are. You get you buy the stable coin, you get a pardon, easy peasy. You've written about another sort of suspicious exchange with the UAE getting access to chips. What are other examples that may be troubling to viewers about what this president is giving up in exchange for donations or investments?
Well, the UAE investment in the Trump family's Bitcoin operation should trouble everyone because, again, it's not just about Trump lining his pockets. The Biden administration had limited the export of high-end chips to the UAE because they were worried about it being a transit point to China, which affects two things: U.S. economic competitiveness, AI, technological development, and also U.S. national security. Those chips are fundamental to military operations. Within about 3 weeks of Trump getting inaugurated, he lifted that ban. And we now know that a few days before he was inaugurated, a very influential Emirati invested about $500 million in the Trump enterprises, of which about $187 million came into the Trump family coffers. So when the Republicans are wringing their hands over Hunter Biden's laptop, that is like an echo on a distant planet compared to the stuff that Trump is doing. He's on the front lawn of the White House, raking up piles of money as if they were autumn leaves, taking them into the White House and putting them in a big bag and exchanging U.S. foreign policy, national security, and the interests of average voters for money.
Yeah, that's an incredible visual that you just painted for us there.
I think that's what's significant about it. It's not just that it's abhorrent that they are lining their own pockets. It's how are they sacrificing the national interest?
Who are they selling out?
And who are they selling out? Exactly.
Because I spoke last week with the tech executive who said that basically his view was it's completely inevitable that those chips are going to be in China's hands now, which we're in the AI arms race. And so to give that advantage, which you could argue that the technology is advancing so quickly, they're going to get it anywhere, they're going to get it on the black market, but it just doesn't make that much sense at a time when our relations are so fraught with China and we're trying to keep our advantage. Why cede the advantage?
Well, I mean, I think the technology leaders are happy to say it will get there anyway because they're making a lot of money off those sales. And if they themselves don't believe there's anything beyond their own bottom line about where those chips land, and that they as business leaders also have a stake in U.S. stability, U.S. national security, U.S. economic competitiveness vis-a-vis China or any other country, they're not actually speaking as members of a community. They're speaking as self-interested individuals also trying to maximize their profits at the expense of the U.S. national interest.
If you had the ear of lawmakers and could convince them to zero in on something right now, to focus on just one part of this web, what would you tell them to do?
Well, you know, Antonia, the tricky thing is you'd say, let's make sure the SEC, the FBI, the DOJ, and the State Department are examining all these things. But of course, they're also under Donald Trump's control. So they're not going to do it. You could ask the Republican Party to pass stricter laws so the executive branch is subject to the same kind of ethics rules that everyone else in the federal government is, because the presidency currently isn't. But they're not going to do that. So I think at this point we have to wait for the midterms and hope that some gumption comes back into the congressional wheels so someone stands up against this, because otherwise it's just going to continue.
My feeling is even if they passed another law, who's going to enforce the law?
Exactly.
Right? So,
I mean, that's what's so unique about this here. You know, Todd Blanche a few weeks ago said in questions about all these deals, he said there's nothing untoward or unprecedented about what Donald Trump is doing. But that's raw propaganda. It is wildly untoward and it is absolutely unprecedented. The founding fathers would be spinning in their graves watching the way that he's just hung a shingle on the Oval Office.
Tim O'Brien, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for your great reporting.
Thank you.
Coming up, the head of the South Texas Builders Association warns that Trump's immigration raids are scaring off workers and could flip South Texas blue. We'll speak to him next. You're watching the Weekend Primetime on MS Now. Between tariffs and immigration raids, Donald Trump has basically torched the U.S. construction industry. And yet it stayed pretty silent, at least until now. According to Politico, construction executives and home builders have held multiple meetings over the past month with the White House and members of Congress. They say immigration raids at job sites and in local communities are scaring off workers. And it's driving up the cost of home building when this country desperately needs more housing. Many construction executives say that they didn't expect enforcement to go quite this far, particularly in Republican strongholds like Southern Texas. Mario Guerrero, CEO of the South Texas Builders Association and a Trump voter who traveled to Washington last week, told Politico, quote, "I told lawmakers South Texas will never be red again." And Mario Guerrero joins us now. Mario, thank you so much for being with us. So I want to ask you a little bit about the role that the private sector has to play in all of this. The government has been conducting these warrantless raids on construction sites around the country for the past year. And to my knowledge, not a single business or industry group has been willing to stand up and sue over it. I know you're having these meetings with lawmakers and with the White House, but I'm only aware of exactly one case where someone is suing the government over these warrantless raids on construction sites, and it's a worker, a U.S. citizen, who has been detained by ICE multiple times. He's been willing to stick his neck out, but industry has not. And the government's argument in that case is that it is up to businesses, not workers, to push back. They are the ones who have the standing to sue. So why haven't you seen that kind of pushback from the industry?
I believe that the reason, well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of y'all's show. But what I believe that it is that we know that construction sites are basically considered to be open to the public. So meaning that at any given day, if you're walking around and you see a house that's under construction, you can walk into it. There's nothing that's basically separating you from the house and a person to enter that particular construction site at any given time. So it's really hard for a construction company to go ahead and actually sue the administration on regards to that. Now, we were in Washington about a week ago with Mr. Henry Cuellar that put these meetings on and together with us. And on one of the meetings that we had, it was with somebody directly from ICE. I cannot say his name. We were asked to make sure that we do keep his name off records. But one of the things that we did talk about was the private property. You know, we do buy these particular pieces of land. We do purchase them outright. We also go ahead and build on them. And we wanted to know what is private property. Now, like I said, and I'll reiterate, it's not considered private property if it's not fenced in. So now we're taking that information and we're already in the moves of fencing in our construction sites, because they're saying that you need to fence it in order to be considered private property.
Seriously? You tell that to some American citizens in red states that their private property that's not fenced in is subject to warrantless search, and woo!
Well, we have had people on the show who have actually had federal agents jump over fences in order to do what they wanted to do. So I'm not sure that will
to catch construction workers, or to detain construction workers, I should say.
So Mario, I want to ask you. So you've been open about the fact that you supported President Trump. Given what you know now, knowing what you know now, if you could go back, would you still support him?
This is what I'll say, since I've been asked this question multiple times. Right now, in the moment of time, I would not. Just because we're seeing a very strong enforcement policy, not just on construction sites, but right now it seems very racial. It seems like it's very targeted towards a specific group of people, which is the Hispanic population. So no, obviously not. Now, I have been asked this before, and I will say that as a businessman, and you see everything that he's been able to accomplish with his construction company, it's hard not to be able to admire certain accolades that he does have. People like to say, well, he got $1 million or whatever dollars from his family, but I know so many people that have gotten money from their family and throw it away. So with that being said, there's certain things that from one person to another, politics aside, that I do respect. Now, with what we're dealing with nowadays, it's something that myself and a lot of my constituents that I have in my organization were not seeing or didn't foresee happening. You know, we come from a very specific place, which is South Texas, right? And in South Texas, we saw an extreme with President Biden. And what I mean by extreme, I mean it was something we had never seen before. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that were at our borders. Any given Sunday, it's very common and normal for our families to go to Mexico and have lunch. And it's very normal for us to walk over through the bridge, and then you show your credentials and you go eat and then you come back. That's something that's very normal. And even in those normal things that we were doing during the Biden administration, we saw hundreds of thousands of people thrown on the ground, living in tents, literally swimming.
Regardless of your objections to policy under Joe Biden. That's okay. But we want to talk about the circumstances today, which is that, again, this administration is rounding up people simply, it seems, because of how they look and the occupations that they are in. And this Supreme Court has basically blessed that sort of racial profiling, that so-called Kavanaugh stops. They are apparently trampling construction sites simply because they're not fenced in, I guess, and rounding up, in many cases, U.S. citizens. That was the lawsuit I referred to earlier. That has to be hurting your bottom line. It has to be alienating businesses like yours, other industry groups. I mean, not just construction, anyone who works in food services or healthcare or a lot of other sectors that are very heavily reliant on immigrant labor. And I guess the question is, how can you still see, or how can the business community and or Latino voters, and there's quite a bit of overlap between those two groups, continue to remain silent or put up with these kinds of policy measures that are very clearly hampering lots of people's lives and livelihoods?
I don't think that the people that are in the Hispanic community are going to stay silent anymore. The one thing about the Hispanic culture is that we're raised to be good, hearted people, and we take a lot from people. So what we like to say in Spanish is somos humildes. That means that we're humble people. But you can only push the Hispanic culture so far before they start raising concern. And that's the reason that I basically had to cry for help, because it became so normal for us to see ICE agents following concrete trucks to concrete pours, literally waiting for them to start the job, and then they would go and apprehend all these people with the proper credentials to work, people that had credentials given by the Biden administration that now we're being told that those credentials they're not valid for this administration. So they're also being apprehended and taken away. And one of the things that people need to understand, that's just one example. And in that example, you're seeing a loss of upwards of $30,000 when you're just pouring foundation. There's so many things that go into pouring a foundation that you're already in a negative. And that trickled effect that we've seen for a year has actually put us halt on companies. Now,
but
there's
it's also
companies
it's not just a financial hit, right? This has actually gotten personal for you. Since you've started speaking out, you've faced death threats.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, I have. I find it funny, like I think it's very sad, because we should understand as American citizens that we live in the best country in the world. We're able to have open dialogue like we're having here today, and we should be able to raise our concerns. That's why our politicians are here, and that's why we, the people, have put our politicians where they're at in order to represent us in the good and in the bad. Now, if you're going to send me death threats over the way that I see something, and if I personally believe that it's wrong, and not just myself, the organization that I represent has over 158 companies in there. In that organization, we're at over, you could say if every company has 4 people, you could do the math how many members we have, right? I have not spoken to somebody that is okay with what's going on. I had to raise a concern because I have friends that are also business owners that they honestly see something where this is not right. Now, if people are going to send me death threats because I'm raising a concern on that, I think it's funny, because I don't even have the time to eat some days. So I just think it's funny.
Well, it's a strange political environment, but you are not the first guest we've had on this show who has said that they've faced those kinds of threats and attacks just for speaking out about the impacts of the facts, just what's simply happening to them. Mario Guerrero, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really great to speak with you and to hear your story and your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Next, we're going to speak with Congressman Jim McGovern, ranking member of the House Rules Committee, about the partial government shutdown and what Democrats are demanding from Republicans to rein in ICE. You're watching The Weekend Primetime on MS Now. This latest government shutdown is now the third of Trump's second term. But unlike those of the past, this one is more limited. It only affects the Department of Homeland Security. Still, the department is sweeping in its scope and certainly in its budget, responsible not only for immigration enforcement, but also disaster response and airport security. But after 2 U.S. citizens were shot dead by immigration officers in Minneapolis, Democrats have been demanding that major reforms need to be cemented into law before agreeing to fully fund the department. Take a listen to this.
Judicial warrants should be required before ICE agents can storm private property or rip everyday Americans out of their homes. ICE should be targeting violent felons who are here unlawfully, as opposed to violently targeting law-abiding immigrant families.
They have to coordinate with local governments. They don't do that now. They just show up in an area that may be perfectly safe and fine. We need a code of use of force.
All right, we're going to bring in Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. He is the ranking member of the Rules Committee. Congressman, good to have you here at the table with us tonight.
Happy to be with you.
So in that same interview, you just saw Chuck Schumer speaking with Jake Tapper there. At one point, as he was being pressed on sort of how all of this is realistically going to unfold, he seemed to express a genuine belief that his Republican colleagues would eventually just come to the same common sense agreements that Democrats have laid out here. But I think a lot of Democrats at this point don't think Republicans are actually going to come to the table and, be enlightened and see ICE in a new light. So realistically, what is the strategy here? When you look at these demands, are they all or nothing, or are there some weak points?
Well, I can't vote for 1 more cent for ICE. And I think, speaking to the reforms that Leader Jeffries was talking about, I think if it was a private vote, I think we'd have some Republicans vote with us, but they're all afraid of Trump. I mean, this is an agency that has killed American citizens. And Kristi Noem is the head of this agency. I've never seen a more incompetent leader of any government agency in my life. And she just lies constantly. So there's no confidence here that anything's going to change. And so my suggestion would be you separate the ICE from the rest of the budget. I mean, let's fund TSA, let's fund FEMA, let's fund the Coast Guard, but just take ICE out of it.
But if you take ICE out of it, if you said you don't want to fund one more penny to ICE or whatever your phrasing was. But it doesn't matter if you don't give any additional money to ICE. ICE got a huge cash infusion last year, right? And even if the rest of DHS stays shut down indefinitely, I think ICE can continue running at like double capacity, its usual annual capacity for the next 3 years.
Well, we ought to claw back that $75 billion in the big ugly bill that passed and actually put it toward, improving health care for people or combating hunger in this country, or fund these other agencies if you want. But I think we've crossed the line. And I'm somebody who many years ago, in 2018, called for the abolition of ICE when they were separating children from their parents. I thought that was cruel and awful. Didn't reflect the values of this country. But now it is totally out of control. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
But does that mean you are specifically asking, like the demand is that you will not vote for reopening DHS unless the money is clawed back, unless that's the red line?
I can't vote for any more ICE money, period. And so if I want to support these other agencies, I think you have to separate the ICE money from everything else.
So realistically, what are the non-negotiable demands? That officers need to be wearing body cams, no more funding? What are the demands that Democrats will not concede on?
Yeah, I think Hakeem Jeffrey just mentioned some of them. I mean, are there judicial warrants when ICE goes into, a workplace or into a private home? I mean, the body cams, why is this law enforcement agency wearing masks? I mean, I just walked here and I saw a lot of New York City police officers. They're not wearing masks. I mean, this is an agency that is terrorizing, not just the immigrant community, but terrorizing American citizens. And, I have people come up to me on airplanes and tell me, you got to stop this. I don't want my tax dollars going to fund this agency.
I want to turn to Cuba, if that's okay, with the time that we have left with you here. You have introduced a new bill seeking to put an end to the embargo that's been in place for quite a long time here. And I'm curious how you read the messaging coming out of this administration right now. Rubio, for a long time, of course, Secretary Rubio has been anxious to see sort of what's happened to Venezuela happen there, to turn the screws on the country. So what do you think their end game is at this point, and what are you realistically thinking is going to happen next?
So what happened in Venezuela? I mean, basically, the government is still the same. People's human rights issues are still difficult. All that happened was that they got Maduro, they put his vice president in place, and they gave a gift to oil companies. I mean, look, I think their policy toward Cuba is a throwback to the Cold War. We've been pursuing the same policy for over 6 decades of isolating the island, economic embargoes, travel restrictions. And it hasn't changed anything. And now they're basically going to punish countries that provide energy to Cuba. And now we're told that on the island there are, blackouts and hospitals are, without power. I mean, that's just cruel. It is absolutely cruel. And my belief is the best way to try to impact change is to open things up. I was part of a small group of members of the Congress that went to President Obama and helped convince him, to open things up. And things were, I think, beginning, you saw more political space. Then Trump became president, and then he shut everything down, and Biden didn't do anything until the end of his term. But I think, opening things up to American businesses, to tourists, to academics, to encourage cultural exchanges, I think that'll do more to open Cuba up than all this rhetoric that we're hearing from this administration. And by the way, I think the future of Cuba ought to be determined by Cubans on the island who live on the island, not by Marco Rubio and not by Donald Trump.
Congressman Jim McGovern, it was lovely to have you on set, and we hope you can come back again soon.
Thank you very much.
With us. And still to come, why more kids are ending up in ICE custody under Trump. You're watching The Weekend Primetime on MS Now.